South Africa's economy is 11% bigger than previously estimated after statistics authorities changed the way they calculate gross domestic product. GDP at current prices measured at 5.52 trillion rand comes out to about $369 billion in 2020 compared to the previous estimate of 4.9 trillion rand, according to Joe De Beer, who's a Deputy Director General at the Economic Data at the Statistics South Africa. The economy remains Africa's second biggest behind Nigeria. Michael Ogunremi, who's a macroeconomist and fixed income analyst at Chapel Hill Denham, joins us to discuss further. Michael, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. For the benefit of viewers, what is a GDP rebasement?
Well, so I think the starting point will be understanding what GDP is, right? So GDP is just simply what the monetary worth of economic activities in a country is, right? So from the person teaching in the school to the banker offering banking services to the doctor providing health services, all of these activities you can place monetary values on them and then quantify it, right? So to now speak to what exactly is the number, how exactly do we place a value on the economy? There's a nominal GDP, there's a real GDP, right? The real GDP is just saying, okay, this is the value of what we've produced measured at prices today. What the prices of those products and services are, right? And then the real GDP is saying, okay, this is the value of what we've produced today measured at a base year price, right? So that's where the whole idea of rebasing comes in, right? So what then happens is, from time to time, countries sort of shift the base year that they use to, value the products and the services that they sell in that country. That is where the whole rebasing, of the thing, comes from.
And so why, I guess, if one was to ask why countries do this, is it to remain updated as far as outputs and consumption is concerned? Why do they do that?
So they do that because of, I think, three main things. Number one, if there's been an economic shock, say in the last 5-10 years, it then becomes imperative for them to rebase the worth of the economy, right? If they've had significant changes in the level of prices, so for instance, let's say the economy has been in crisis and then, prices of things have sort of evolved significantly, they also have to consider that as well. I think the reason why they also, rebase is if they feel like, the economic structure of the country has changed. So let's say before it used to be an agrarian economy, and then all of a sudden we see the service sector pushing more fronts for GDP. It then becomes, important for them to rebase, that economy. I think those are the three things that sort of warrant rebasing. And then there's the fact that, there is a regulation out there that says a country's GDP should be rebased every 5 years. I think we'll get to that.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why that margin between the frequency of rebasement?
I think it's the United Nations Statistical Commission that says that a country's GDP should be rebased every 5 years. I think the rationale for that is that, 5 years is a medium term. And between, in a span of 5 years, it's most likely that there would have been some sort of fundamental changes in the structure of an economy. If it is not in respect to prices, it could be in respect to production. And so it becomes, so it's more like it's a standard to say every 5 years it's important for you to rebase the economy because something must have happened.
And can one look at this in terms of benefits, as far as any benefits coming out of rebasement?
Well, to be honest, the only benefit for me, some other persons might have a different opinion, but I think the only benefit for me in terms of rebasing is ratios, right? So any ratio that is indexed to the GDP sort of changes. So things like per capita GDP, things like debt to GDP ratio, things like current account to GDP ratio, those things, those ratios will definitely change the moment you rebase the GDP. So, specifically the increase, right? Because you they reduce rather because you sort of have, a higher GDP whenever you rebase. So those ratios come down. And the benefits, for that is, so for instance, if a country wants to apply for a loan, the creditor who will be giving them the loan will most likely want to see a lower debt ratio because if they have a high debt ratio, they will be less inclined to give them more loans, right? So I think that's the only benefit. But in terms of how exactly does it affect the economy, how does it affect the standard of living of the people, I don't see any transition, to be very honest, because, despite the fact that some countries in Africa rebased, their GDP in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've not really seen any improvement in terms of what the standard of living is, what infrastructure, what's the state of infrastructures and things like that. So in terms of the real impact on the people, I don't see any benefit of rebasing.
There's been so much news coming out of South Africa. We've put up those unemployment figures now. South Africa, Namibia, Nigeria leading the way. The riots in South Africa recently, this GDP rebasement. How do you view South Africa's economy, I guess from a macro view also?
So the thing with South Africa is, I don't think South Africa has an economic issue. I really don't. I don't think so.
Even with this number we're looking at right now, Michael. Okay.
I think the issue with South Africa are basically political and social.
Okay.
Yeah. So the political landscape in South Africa has been somewhat turbulent in terms of how the past government performed. So there were news, that made rounds about corruption and embezzlement and all of that. There are news around lopsidedness in fiscal appointments and all of that. So that's political contention you have here and there is one of the issues you have in South Africa. But I think the biggest spotlight will be on the social issues, right? So you have things like xenophobia. You have things like high unemployment. You have things like high inequality. I think those are the real issues bordering on South Africa. So for instance, you look at South Africa having the highest unemployment rates. It's not because South Africa is not industrialized. When you think about it, it's not because of that. It's simply because of the fact that a lot of people don't have, a lot of the South African nationals don't have the skills to be employable, right? Gotcha. So if you check the corporate space, you see a lot of white people. You have more white representation on the board. You do have the blacks, but the majority tilts to the black, right? And so because of the fact that the South African nationals themselves have not grown to acquire very relevant skills that can put them out there, you have a very high rate of unemployment. Inequality is also very severe because you have this big dichotomy between the upper class and the lower class, right? The gap between them is a lot. And while some people might think that redistribution of wealth is the solution, I don't think redistribution of wealth will solve the issue, because if you redistribute wealth, the rich will still find a way to take it back, right? Gotcha. So I think the borderline solution will be for them to upskill, South African nationals, upskill them and create an incentive for them to work. Because there's also the issue of perhaps an average South African would most likely not want to work and probably take unemployment benefits. Right, so there has to be some sort of way to incentivize these people to work, upskill them, give them more skills that can make them, more employable.
Great stuff. Finally, a few seconds ago, I guess they've made an announcement. They're looking at high-speed rail for Pretoria, Durban, and I think Johannesburg. That connection there, is that part of the infrastructure developments that nations of South Africa's size should be pushing towards?
I absolutely agree with you. Because currently the world is recovering. I don't think there is anywhere in economic theory where they say infrastructure should be capped at so amounts, right? I don't think so. You can have enough infrastructure, right? Especially in a recovery phase like this. So I think it's a welcome development. I think that the enabling infrastructure for South Africa is there, which is electricity.
Right.
You want to operate a high-speed rail, you do need electricity. That's the difference between what you have in the Nigerian rail system and then the South African rail system. So I think it's a welcome development. And when you think about it, transportation is that connection that links virtually almost all the sectors together. Agri to manufacturing to services. You have transportation right there. The moment you fix that transportation and you make sure it's working well, everything just falls in place.
Michael Oguremi, macroeconomist and fixed income analyst with Chapel Hill Denham. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.